In March 2020, we accepted a challenge to reimagine a familiar song and, at the same time, bring life to a story that had faded from our collective memory. A story of one nameless soldier who, 100 years ago, was brought home from the battlefields of World War I. A story of the hymn that sang him to his final resting place in 1920 and became the first ever electrical recording sold to the public. And the story of our journey to re-record that song in circumstances none of us could ever have imagined. In Britain in 1920, grief was everywhere. Over 1 million of our service people had died on battlefields around the world. Another 228,000 died in a horrifying flu pandemic that spread rapidly in the months after the war. The country was aching to move on, but seemingly unable to let go of its past. It felt like Britain needed to find a way to heal without forgetting the enormous sacrifices that had been made. Reverend David Railton, a chaplain who had himself served on the front line, wrote to the Dean of Westminster, Herbert Ryle, with an idea. The idea had first come to him when he had seen a rough cross in the garden of a small French house. Written on the cross was the inscription, "An unknown British soldier."
You were in the aftermath of the First World War. You had a huge number of bodies, 165,000 bodies were never found from British and Commonwealth troops. And there were lots of grieving families who had nobody to mourn with. And the idea was to bring back an unknown warrior and give them a full state burial in Westminster.
Every step of the way, from French coast to English suburbs, people came out to honour the unknown warrior as the procession passed.
In the London suburbs, there were scores of homes with back doors flung wide, light flooding out. And in the garden, figures of men, women and children gazing at the great lighted train rushing past.
There are some themes from then and now which are both still very relevant: strength in adversity and unity, people coming together through music.
Music's always had the power to remind us that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
I come from a family of singers. My father still sang in a choir at age 89. My mother, who has dementia, she remembers lyrics to songs.
Those times when I feel like I'm really on my own and it's dark and I'm scared, it's like a light goes on and I just know which way I'm meant to head. So it's almost like music just brings me home.
On the morning of November the 10th, 1920, the body of the unknown warrior made its way through London streets lined with crowds. After passing a packed Trafalgar Square, the procession paused at Whitehall to allow King George V to unveil the cenotaph. As the procession reached the north door of the Abbey, the choir moved to greet them. Flanked by a guard of honour of 100 recipients of the Victoria Cross, the coffin slowly made its way to its final resting place.
To have the tomb of the unknown soldier in such an important position, just as you enter the Abbey from the main west door, is really a proper and befitting memorial to those hundreds of thousands of people who gave their lives not only in the First World War but subsequently, and whose identities will never ever be discovered.
Stepping forward as the unknown warrior was lowered into the grave, the king dropped a handful of French earth onto the coffin. Then David Railton's altar flag, a flag that had been with him throughout the war, was placed on top. It was now that Abide With Me filled the Abbey and the streets around.
They never went home so that we could carry on. And so to choose one significant unknown means they carry the name of so many.
We lost my great-uncle in the First World War, and his body was never recovered. So the tomb represents, for us and for thousands of others, it's a real focal point and has such significance, and it's so important that we continue to remember him and all those who died for our freedom.
The hymns sung in the service were recorded using experimental equipment by 2 sound engineers, one of them an officer in the newly formed Royal Air Force. The quality of these was so variable, though, that only 2 hymns were deemed fit for release, becoming the first electrical recordings ever sold to the public. Abide With Me was one of those, and a remarkable record of the unity and power of song.
What we were trying to do was be really respectful of the original and to do something that was entirely in keeping with the emotion behind that, but at the same time as framing it in a way that would give it the best chance of communicating with as many people as we could in the modern day. You know, the message of the song is very definitely, you're not alone in your grief, you're not alone in suffering, you're not alone in being scared, you're not alone in, you know, really being uncertain about the future. But it's a message of hope and, you know, triumph over adversity, really.
Following the burial, servicemen from the armed forces stood guard as tens of thousands of mourners filed silently past.
When I think of all the people that have given their lives and have not come back, and they are everyone's brothers, fathers, uncles, cousins, family members, to have that grave was so important for people to have somewhere to go and pay tribute to them. I think it definitely honors all that have given their lives for us.
By the 18th of November, the day the grave was closed to the public, an estimated 1.25 million people had visited the Abbey, an outpouring of grief and emotion that the country had never seen before. One old lady came from the far north of Scotland. She carried a bunch of withered flowers and told me with tears in her eyes that the flowers came from a little garden which her boy had planted when he was only 6.
This story of the unknown warrior, that they were given a state burial and they were buried right in the middle of Westminster Abbey next to kings and queens, poets, some of the most famous people who have ever lived in our country, is a great reminder that we're all in this together.
For the next 12 months, the space enclosed in the grave continued to fill with flowers, wreaths and other tributes.
So it's a reminder of what people gave, it's a reminder of what we have, and it's a reminder of what is important to us as we move into the future.
It's just our way of remembering, and it's so important for every generation from here on in never to forget.
On the tomb's enduring power, David Relton himself noted that those whose loved ones were amongst the unknown know that in this tomb there is, resting the body of their beloved. They know also that he is not there himself, though he may often be near. They have moreover learnt the unity of all types of men.